Chris O'Connor here. Join the Curmudgeon Rock Report's invite-only curmudgeonly community at facebook.com/curmudgeonrock. Also look out for a Spotify playlist that pays honor to this episode.
This is the Curmudgeon Rock Report, and this is your podcast made by rock geek iconoclastic outsiders for rock geek iconoclastic outsiders. For those of you who lament that rock music has gone the way of jazz and slipped into niche genre status, we are here to keep that flame alive by providing insight, analysis, recommendations, and honest takes, not hot takes. And hey, there's a good chance you'll learn some rock history you never knew before. One of the most inexplicable phenomena in rock music for nearly the past 20 years is the continued popularity and now approaching legacy status of the Killers. It's fitting that this band comes from Las Vegas because only the shallowness of Sin City could produce the cheesiest, corniest pastiche of retro 80s synth pop and this kind of glossy, derivative, third-rate new wave horse manure. Chris, one of yours truly curmudgeons, likes at least one or two of their songs. Otherwise, he thoroughly dislikes them. This particular curmudgeon, though, detests this band and everything they stand for. Shallow, wannabe smart, overproduced schlock rock disguised as hip indie rock with an obnoxious Mormon lead singer. What a crock of shit. Join us as the Curmudgeon Rock Report bring you another entry in our shit series by breaking down the Killers album by dreadful album and make the case as to why the Killers are shit.
Oh yeah, so this should be fun. The story of a bad band that goes from being reverent of New Order and Duran Duran to being reverent of Bruce Springsteen's Nebraska.
Yeah, here's the thing with the Killers and why we're doing this episode. The Killers, for casual fans or in general, they're basically known. The foundation of their legacy is their early records.
Yes.
Those first two albums, Hot Fuss and Sam's Town, that had all the big hits, right? They're the ones that produced Mr. Brightside. They're the ones that produced, what was the other big hit from Hot Fuss? Somebody told me. Oh. They're the ones that produced, the one that sounds most like Springsteen when you were young. Yeah. And they had another one in 2008 called Human. But really, it's those early records that is what they're known for. And to this day, they're still a pretty popular band. They're still a popular band to this day. But if you listen to their whole discography, from the beginning up until now, the disparity between their popularity and the actual quality of their discography is really vast.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. It's kind of like sometimes, this is one of those, I guess, you can't judge a book by its cover. Yeah, the cover is pretty with Mr. Brightside and when you were young, but then it's like, it's kind of like a clogged toilet.
I don't even like those songs, but we'll get into that later.
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah, for sure. Well, first, though, we go to the other side of the space-time continuum. Yes, there is shitty shit over in the parallel universe, but that's stuff that nobody cares about, which makes it a wonderful world. The shitty shit stays in the sewer. And so here in the parallel universe, we like to talk about actual good records, and so does everybody else. Imagine that, for a change. Yes, over in our world, you do get your occasional exception like Boy Genius, which is on its way to being a big hit, but otherwise, not Graveyard on this side, over on the other side, billboards and cheers and sold out stadiums. And so long way of saying we cover new records or newish records that both of us are digging this this month and at this time. Arturo, you return to one of, I know, your favorite bands, and one that has a really, really good shtick.
Yeah, this is the newest by Sleaford Mods, UK Grim. Now, I admit that putting the latest Sleaford Mods album in our parallel universe is cheating a bit, considering that they're quite popular in the UK and their recent albums have all charted in the British top 10. So let's put a wrinkle in the parallel universe and say this is a parallel universe where England's greatest socio-political tackling pop culture attacking indie rock electro clash hybrid duo is also popular outside of the UK.
Yeah.
That's the parallel universe wrinkle here. Now, their last couple of albums saw them, the duo, augment their minimalist beats with reggae and old school hip hop. On UK Grim, the album title being a pun on the British hip hop style called grime, Andrew Fern, the duo's beatmaker, expands their patented template to include guitar rock, a heavier drum sound, and synth pop textures. The results are a bit mixed. Synth pop tends to water down the group's potent sound, I think, but the good stuff really, really hits. And let's face it, a Sleaford Mods album that doesn't quite hit their own lofty standards is still better than most bands and artists' best work. Like Lou Reed used to say, my week beats your year. Of course, the highlight of any Mods album is Jason Williamson and his working class conscious, angry, funny, pop culture referencing rants that fall somewhere between hip hop rapping and confrontational spoken word performance. Sleaford Mods are more a socio-political pop art project than they are a band. And Williamson, with his force of nature personality and powerful lyrics, he really is the heart and soul of this project. The highlighted track, at least for me, is So Trendy, where singer Perry Farrell and guitarist Dave Navarro from Jane's Addiction, yes, you heard that right,
Yes.
guest star on a vicious snipe at pretentious indie hipster douchebags who think they're setting trends but are actually just following them. Who knew that the guy who sang Been Caught Stealing, even in his early 60s, would be the perfect vocal complement to Williamson's spoken word rage? Who knew? Anyway, if you've never heard Sleaford Mods before, hopefully UK Grim will get you to delve into their thoroughly awesome back catalog. Chris?
Yeah, let's not let the irony of a song called So Trendy with Dave Navarro on guitar go unnoticed. I mean, come on. Navarro is one of those pretty guys that will always have a job. I mean, as in he has been hosting or did host you ever seen Ink Master? It's
No,
a
never.
it's a tattoo reality show that Navarro hosts that made it for like 10 seasons on CW or something. My wife binge watched that one time on Netflix, and it was better than it had a right to be.
Yeah.
But yeah, be that as it may, it's actually a fucking awesome song. It's just, anyway, let's stop picking on Dave Navarro. Uh, Good stuff. I like this out. It's a fun record. It might not be as good as Spare Ribs or as essential as Spare
Yeah.
Ribs, because what I like about Spare Ribs is it had a kind of a consistency
Mm,
across songs so that it really made Jason Williamson's rantings and ravings and observations really stand out. It gets meditative. Here, there's just a lot of fun. Like you said, there's a little bit of wink, wink, tributing to grime
right.
on UK Grim. There's some drum and bass influence on here. There's some stuff that you could say would approach. I guess you could say approaches punk. I
Mm,
guess that doesn't surprise me because maybe, arguably, you could call Jason Williamson a spiritual stepson of Johnny Rotten.
yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
but politically more liberal.
yeah. Well, these days for sure. Yeah, yeah. Johnny Rotten is and Jason Williamson would probably like get into a brawl. Even now, like Rotten
Yeah.
would probably take a swing at him, even if he can barely move his arms.
Yeah.
Poor old man. But anyway, and then they also pull off the very, very, very neat trick. And besides So Trendy, this is my favorite song on the record. Force 10 from the Navarone, which is got a really cool beat, but they pulled a neat trick of making Florence Shaw from dry cleaning sound cool for for whatever. I mean, it
The,
just
the most talentless front person in any rock band right now.
yeah. But hey, I don't know if it's a case of them fitting the beat to her shit or her actually fitting her shit to the beat, which would be just kind of shocking if that happened. Okay, so as we've been doing lately, strangely, we seem to be oscillating between the UK and Los Angeles with our choices, and I think that we're changing roles here from a couple of episodes ago. I'm traveling to Los Angeles, and yet another terrific female dominant bands. And then in this case, it's not all female, but female dominant bands from Los Angeles and Southern California. It's incredible how many of these bands have been hitting the scene in the last 5 years. This band is Death Valley Girls. And Death Valley Girls, I really like this band, and I really think that they're one of the cooler bands that's hit in the U.S. Here lately. This is an album called Islands in the Sky. Just came out within the last month, I believe, or last week. Yeah, last month or 6 weeks. It's called Islands in the Sky. And how do I describe the this band's sound? Well, I mean, I'll kind of let them help me out here.
Mm.
There's a wonderful song on this record called Magic Powers. It's just a really groovy, funky throwback, almost like late 70s punk, which kind of combines, I don't know, it kind of combines a Stooges vibe with a B-52s vibe, which is
Mm.
kind of a strange mix. But they have a lyric in there that goes shimmer, shimmer, glow, and shake.
Hmm.
I mean, that basically describes the band. Uh, I would say another way is you can call them Fuzzy and Buzzy, would be another group. I think you can call them the girl group from Jupiter because they definitely have some fun with Phil Spector or Ronettes style vocals. They themselves have termed their music California Doom Boogie,
Hmm.
which again I think is another good descriptor. And so they've been raising in profile. They had an album a couple of years ago called Under the Spell of Joy.
Fantastic record.
Yeah, which is very good. It's very garagey and very punky. Like I said, it owes some deference to the Stooges and to the old Wall of Sound. And it has one song in particular that I think is the best in their catalog called It All Washes Away. However, this new record, Islands in the Sky, which I think should be more aptly titled Islands from Hell,
Hmm.
or Islands Down in Hell, because that's kind of what it sounds like. I really like this record. I think this record's fantastic because what it does is it takes that it takes that swagger and that bash out and that scuzziness from the previous records, and it adds a dollop of prog, and also it has this, I guess you could call it a meditative and spiritual cousin to early Black Sabbath occult type rock. Stuff from the first record and Paranoid. It has a little bit of that going on. As I said, to me, the standout track, the best track on the album is called Magic Powers, which has this really fun, reverent kind of garage rock organ loop that then just sort of it rumbles and shakes, and it just has a groove to it, and it's kind of like an anthem to just punk girls everywhere. Well, I guess you could call them, sort of doughy-eyed stoner, kind of club girls everywhere. I should mention that the front woman of this band is a woman named Bonnie Blomgarden, who is really, really, really talented. Very good songwriter. She does a lot of the keyboards on this record, which kind of gives it that, to me, that spooky, proggy, but also funny feel to it. And she has kind of a detached vocal style as well. So the two main people in this band are Bonnie Blomgarden and a guy named Larry Schemmel on guitar. If Schemmel sounds familiar, yes, he is related to Hole drummer Patty Schemmel, who, as it turns out, is a founding member of this band. Strange but true. And she was only in it for a little while. So more about this record. I think as a whole, it has this It's like a journey through a blended mind of bored stoner, garage rock, and prog rock adherents from otherwise sunny California. Other highlights on this record for me: "Journey to Dog Star," which I think is the spaciest, most proggy, definitely most Black Sabbathy song on the record. It's stretched and it's slowed and it's really really cool. There's a few other songs on here that get more propulsive and more garagey and more closer to the spirit of Under the Spell of Joy. There's "Watch the Sky." And then at the end of the record, the record actually ends really strong. There's a couple on there called "When I'm Free," and it's really kind of amazing, that have a swinging rhythmic stomp to them, and they're kind of uh, thrusted forward by electric piano and thumping drums. And surprisingly enough, you wouldn't really expect it from this band, but all of a sudden they fall into a Rolling Stones, I guess you could say, like It's Only Rock and Roll era kind of groove, and almost like a rhythmic machine feel to it. So this band has got a pretty impressive garage rock and prog rock and space rock vocabulary, but they're also good enough to like let it rock and let it swing and let it bash out. Arturo, your take?
Yeah, I mean, I generally, I like this band a lot. Like I said, Under the Spell of Joy from 2020 is my number 2 album of the year 2020. Number 1 being Run the Jewels RTJ4.
Oh yeah,
The way I would describe this band, they take the psychedelic garagey, it's a psychedelic garage rock of the Brian Jonestown Massacre and put it through a very, very strong post-punk filter. Okay. And
yeah,
with
that's
like
fair.
really little sprinkles of what you call that Phil Spector wall of sound girl group vocals on there. With this album, there are a couple of songs I really like, but overall, I'm a little bit disappointed. It lacks the energy and the edge of Under the Spell of Joy. It also lacks the joy of Under the Spell of Joy, and that prog rock slant that you described it is what I don't like about the record. Is what I wish they would not have gone into, because I really like this band. I really do. And there are some songs that I love, like what are the odds is you mentioned When I'm Free. I really like What Are the Odds. Magic Powers is pretty good too. And yeah, like
Yeah,
I said, there are a couple of really strong songs that I really like on this album, but just overall, it plods a little too much. Is what I'm trying to say.
hey, it's Chris. Yours truly, Curmudgeons, record the Curmudgeon Rock Report using a program called Zencastr. And we have used this program since we launched a little over 2 years ago. And much like we have evolved, so has Zencastr. The company was essentially in early startup mode at the time, and, there have been bugs and annoyances along the way. But one thing has remained consistent: the quality and the value for us of the product itself. You see, Zencastr records the tracks of a podcast's participants natively. That means our recording session itself is never subject to the inherent unpredictability of the cloud or the inevitable half-assedness that some all-in-one podcasting platforms will have across their functions. Most importantly, since I am in Houston and Arturo is in South Korea, reliable recordings and excellent capture of our Ars Technica USB microphones is absolutely essential. So here we are now in 2023, 50-something episodes into this curmudgeonly journey. And here Zencastr remains. The company just switched from a credits model to a subscription model. Zencastr, we believe, is headed for big things, and we strongly suggest that you use it to record your own podcast. We now return to our regularly scheduled program. Rock on. And now for the story of how a nice Mormon boy from Utah made his way to Las Vegas and became one of the greatest phonies of the last 20 years. Arturo, take it away.
Chris, what do Oasis and the Killers have in common? Well,
Boy, that's a trick question. What's that?
well, yeah. Legend has it that it was after an Oasis show in Las Vegas in 2001 when Brandon Flowers decided to be in a full-fledged rock band. Now,
Oh, there you go.
for as much as this podcast loves Oasis, chalk the Killers up as another mediocre to terrible band that the Gallagher brothers inspired. Guitarist Dave Kuning had moved to Vegas from Iowa and placed an ad in a local newspaper to recruit people to form a band. Flowers answered. The two bonded over their love of David Bowie and New Order. And by November of '01, the duo headed to a studio with a drummer to record a demo of songs, among which was Mr. Brightside. The band spent most of 2002 slogging around the Las Vegas local music scene with a revolving door of drummers and bassists until they settled on Ronnie Vanucci on the drum kit and Mark Sturmer on bass. This solidified their sound and made them stand out in the Vegas scene as a band that merged, that kind of sort of fuzzy Strokesian indie rock with British pop rock.
I think you just indicted them, by the way, by calling them members of the Vegas scene. I didn't know there was a fucking Vegas scene.
Well, check this out.
Go ahead.
Around early 2003, there was a website dedicated to unsigned Las Vegas area bands that featured some songs from the Killers' demo. And Warner Brothers A&R rep Braden Merrick liked what he heard so much that he went to attend a live show and eventually became their manager. After recording another demo tape and distributing it around many record labels, they got the attention of British A&R rep Alex Gilbert, who passed that demo onto his friend Ben Durling of the British indie label Lizard King Records. The Killers signed with Lizard King that summer. Now, released in 2003, September '03, the single Mr. Brightside got a lot of airplay on British radio alongside the expected UK critics' hype. As a result, American record labels soon became interested, resulting in the Killers signing with what was known back then as Island Def Jam. After spending the first half of 2004 touring, opening for the likes of British Sea Power, Stella Star, and Morrissey. God, between Morrissey and Brandon Flowers, talk about a whole lot of ego for one dressing room. The debut album Hot Fuss came out in the summer of '04, and the rest is history. Chris?
Yeah, the rest is history. I mean, that's I guess that's a polite way to put it. Yeah, so I guess we can just sort of get into this. Let me give you a stat before we get going with this tour through the I guess you could call it the catalog or the I don't know. That's the nicer term for pile of shit. So here's a true stat on Spotify. Mr. Brightside. Which, yes, I mean, I think most of our folks know that because it's kind of like become the against the wind of our generation because you just can't avoid it in every mall or every restaurant in America. 1 billion, I said billion, 1,708,936,976 plays on Spotify.
Jeez.
So they're pushing 2 billion plays with Mr. Brightside. And so I guess if you say they have a legacy, it's basically encapsulated in the popularity and the structure of that song. I will admit it is pretty good ear candy. Simon Le Bon, I'm sure, really likes it.
It is very Duran Duran-ish, isn't it?
Yep, go from there. So with that origin story told, talk to us begrudgingly about Hot Fuss. Or Hot Fuss.
Hot Fuss. Album by album. This band's discography is a steaming pile of streaming shit.
It might as well be stealing shit, too.
And stealing as well, yeah. The Killers were popular right out of the gate when the song Mr. Brightside pretty much set the template for the band's sound. Overwrought, melodramatic vocals and insincere woe is me lyrics set to glammed up, sparkling, sing-along, revved up 1980s new wave that should have died along with the 1980s. The song hit the top 10 in both the US and the UK, and to this day, I do not understand the appeal of this song or any of the other atrocious, streamlined pop rock dross on this record. Somebody told me sounds like it's trying to out-polish every overly polished 1980s pop rock act, and all these things that I've done is a plodding clunker of self-pitying fake pathos that somehow manages to descend into god-awful fake gospel. Making it all worse is Brandon Flowers' shrill, personality-devoid voice that sounds the same song in and song out. Like I said earlier, Hot Fuss is a hot shower of shit, and this is supposed to be their best album. And we've got 6 more albums to go. Chris?
It actually, I think it's by far their worst, which is saying something, because I love all these things that I have done. I think that's a great song. It's a great single. It shows, we'll talk about this throughout, but 2 of Brandon Flowers' main influences as a singer and songwriter and performer are U2 and Bruce Springsteen.
Springsteen shows up in the next album.
Yeah, Springsteen starts showing up here a little bit later, but this album is all about Duran Duran and Bono. Completely, utterly influenced by Bono. All these things that I have done is great phony U2. It's evocative of the Unforgettable Fire era stuff that they did, that sort of anthemic stuff that Bono was doing at that time. For Bono, it mostly worked. I think it works here for Brandon Flowers too. I actually am a fan of that. I've got soul, but I'm not a soldier gospel outro to that song. And so I think that is a great earworm, a great catchy, hooky single. I'll admit I've had a time, probably when I was drunk or 2 in law school, where I really dug Mr. Brightside. I guess when you're drunk and you're around a bunch of phony lunkheads, it's not a bad song to sing along to. Here's the problem with that record. So you get past all these things that I have done, which I believe is the 5th track, and it takes an immediate nosedive into painful mediocrity. Loses the hooks, loses the feeling, loses any hint of sincerity, and it just gets atrocious. So by the end of it, it's just muddled. And so it's 3 great singles from a demo surrounded by a bunch of horseshit.
Yeah. I don't even like all these things that I've done. To me, that shit just makes Coldplay sound like Metallica. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Let me give you a couple of quotes, by the way, before we move on. So Entertainment Weekly reviewed this record, and it says they use the line, "Isn't it a little too early for a Strokes tribute band?" And you got to remember this was 2004, and the Strokes were still kind of, they were at the point where they were starting to get mocked. So that's a great line. And then I'll be quoting from this article all throughout these little album shit-alongs. Steven Hyden did this article for Uproxx. He's their chief cultural critic. And essentially what it is Brandon Flowers giving self-reviews of his records. And some of it is just painfully unself-aware. And so to start quoting from that, and this is about this record, Hot Fuss. He says, quote, "I know you may have seen this quote before, but I like this quote, so I'm going to use it again. I'm able to hear it through the hearts of the people in the venue. Some of them, this is their first time seeing this song live, and so I am still able to harness some excitement for it." And he's talking about Mr. Brightside there. And so, that's like, put any singer talking about their biggest hit and the main reason that anybody still buys tickets. That's a very generic quote from Mr. Flowers.
Showbiz.
Yeah. Yuck.
Yeah. Speaking of that, next album, Sam's Town from 2006. If you ever wanted to hear what a glammed up, synthesizer and keyboard driven new wave pop take on Bruce Springsteen. Wait, didn't Bruce do that himself with Born in the USA?
Yeah, pretty much.
In any case, this is what the Killers attempted here, especially with the corny ass Springsteen's pastiche hit single, When You Were Young, which went top 20 in the US and top 10 in the UK. The corniness doesn't end there. The follow up single, Bones, is, you guessed it, a corny attempt at synthesizing Stax record style Southern soul to Broadway musical song tropes. A truly fucking atrocious song. At least Read My Mind isn't terrible, with its cut and paste imagery lyrics and ascending chorus that doesn't sound as forced and contrived as they usually do. The rest of the album is just like I said, Springsteen drama, but glammed up, dolled up, and new waved out. Chris?
Yeah, Read My Mind is actually more Broadway than Bones, which is, in that case, it's a good thing. It's a really nice, almost sincere form of drama. Here's, I guess, an issue I have with Sam's Town, that when I hear When You Were Young and Read My Mind, I immediately think, oh, those are from Hot Fuss. And so I can't keep it straight in my mind. And so it's just sort of their singles, at least in these two records, align a little too perfectly. So that's a little bit of a disappointment. And like you said, you start to get some of that Springsteen influence. I mean, the line from Read My Mind, it's basically a song about escaping this 2-star town.
Yeah.
Isn't that like every other Springsteen song from the 70s?
Yeah. Wanting to get away from the town.
Yeah, exactly. And then, of course, Bones has one of those pretentious Flowers lines where he says, "On the cold, wet dirt, I cry." Well, so do I after listening to your music, you motherfucker.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so, like I said, as I'll be doing here, a couple of we'll do one review quote and one Brandon Flowers quote, and this is all real, folks. Keep that in mind. So this is from Stylus, and it says, "Whatever Sam's Town's scant merits, the album reminds artists to be more careful about their role models and to avoid Bono's phone calls." And then here's the Flowers quote from that Uproxx article, and this is kind of hilarious. And I don't know if he's being pretentious here deliberately or or whatever. I know he's probably being honest, but it's just kind of funny. So here we go. From sentence to sentence, it gets funnier. Quote: "I didn't read a lot as a kid. It wasn't until
No shit.
yeah, it wasn't until my late teens, like 19 or 20, that I started to read. Uh, with Sam's Town, it was a combination of reading more and wanting to evolve and starting to understand that people write about where they're from. I think all of the stuff started to circle and simmer, and I wanted to capture it on that second album. I'd always been interested in lyrics and storytelling, whether it was my dad's music or new wave music. I don't remember too much storytelling in new wave, but anyway, we carry on. Quote, "It was the songs that told stories that I always really gravitated towards. Whether it was Jim Croce telling a story in the car with my dad, or it was even something like Love Vigilantes from New Order, where they're trying to do country in Manchester," said almost nobody ever. End quote. So,
Yeah, well,
and
there you
then,
go.
and then let me, I also want to read something from The Guardian, which is, again, a masterclass in damning with faint praise. And so I have to read this into the record because I admire this writer for getting away with this. Quote, "The Killers seem intent on using their second album to prove they're weightier than previously thought. But this is a band whose sparkling 2004 debut, Hot Fuss, sold 5 million copies because it was bursting with indie disco stompers. It seems unlikely weight is uppermost in their fans' requirements. The downside of this rather overblown approach is Brandon Flowers' newly deepened vocal quaver, think Meatloaf, which, yeah, yeah, which he uses to warble lyrics that aren't nearly as profound as he thinks they are. But the band takes some pleasing sonic swerves, with the core FM rock giving way to oompa breakdowns, string flourishes, and ELO style sing-alongs. Ultimately, though, Sam's Town succeeds because the changes have not come at the expense of the tunes. The album doesn't lend Flowers the gravitas he apparently yearns for, but it does prove that few are better at irrepressible pop hooks and fist pumping choruses. So I don't know if that's supposed to be gushing or whatever, but that almost sounds kind of almost like parody.
It just sounds like meatloaf. That's what sticks out to me in that review.
Yeah, yeah.
Big meatloaf.
Yeah. When you name drop Meatloaf, that kind of waters down the positivity of your review.
Oh
Anyway,
boy, folks, it gets worse from here.
yes, it
Next,
does.
Day and Age from 2008. And here we have the album that contains the Killer's last real big hit, Human, top 40 in the US and number 3 in the UK. Is it any good? Of course not. It's the kind of cheesy, We Are the World inspired, bullshit philosophizing solipsism that judges and contestants on American Idol love to espouse. The world we live in is more of the same lyrical fluff with cheesy synthesizers and a what else new wave inspired rhythm that evokes the worst Annie Lennox songs you never wanted to hear. It really does. It's really bad.
Yeah.
You have a Dustland Fairy Tale, which evokes early 1960s Americana in the lyrics, with Brandon Flowers' Springsteen obsession still in full bore, but the music is more of the same rah-rah, melodramatic, show tune vibe. And yeah, the rest of the album doesn't get better than this. Chris.
Yeah. Okay. So at least one could say that this deviates from the first two records. Flowers has definitely calmed down here, so he's not doing that, sort of over emoting on every song. Like,
He's not being Meatloaf.
yeah, yeah, he's not. Let me rephrase that though. He's not loudly over emoting. So he has more of this higher register, sort of more sort of pop, subdued pop voice on this. It's still phony, but at least it's calmer. Human equals yuck.
It's horrible. It's
Yeah,
horrible.
really awful attempt at early 80s robotic British balladry. For
Yeah.
that kind of stuff, stick to Ultravox.
And
For sure.
Ultravox aren't even that good.
Yeah, I guess they were kind of the little brother of that scene, weren't they? But so now let's get into some quotables.
Yeah, please.
Sputnik Music, which is actually an underrated site. I will admit, Sputnik Music's got some pretty good writing. So here's a terrific line from the end of that review, which again professes to be a positive review. It says, "quote A grandiloquent trip. Day and Age is best listened to with no expectations on a night where you have little else to do but just listen to the new Killers record. It is a hodgepodge of stupid ideas that one will either find brilliant or, well, stupid." So there's that. And
That's
then
a negative review.
yeah, I was going to say. I mean, look, you've heard me say this many times, folks, on this podcast, that there's a difference between stupid and dumb, and dumb is one of the great values of wonderful rock and roll. It's one of the reasons I love rock and roll. Like Kiss, I'll always love Kiss. Why? Because they're dumb and it's wonderful. So that's dumb. This shit is stupid. So anyway, now let's put some words back into Brandon Flowers' mouth from that Uproxx interview.
Yes.
About Day and Age. Quote, "I thought of it as looking at Sam's Town from outer space. We wanted to not deviate too far from Las Vegas, but there's something almost extraterrestrial about Las Vegas." Okay. Anyway, we started experimenting with sounds. It's more of a pop record, but just by nature of what keyboards do, sometimes you can conjure up laser beams and things like that. So continuing, we grew up idolizing Bowie and U2 and people that were sort of were shapeshifters. So it was kind of fun to play with that. There were a lot of bands that stick to one style, and it's beautiful, like the Ramones and the Strokes. People like that they have that thing, but we were searching, I think. We're still searching. Well, obviously they kept searching for, like being a good band. And And the Ramones and the Strokes didn't have to do too much searching because one, they knew who they were, and two, uh, the Ramones were always great. The Strokes at least were great for 3 records. So, uh, yeah, Brandon. I mean, I like that you've got the right references, but oh, I don't know. Sincere Mormons.
On this episode, we took a gigantic shit on the career and discography of that most awful of retro 80s pop bands, The Killers. For the next episode, yours truly, Curmudgeons, will get even more curmudgeonly and sling some hot, toxic fecal matter on quite possibly the worst emo punk band of them all, My Chemical Romance. Actually, calling them punk is an insult to punk bands. Their unlistenable dreck has inspired a hardcore fan base of eyeliner-wearing, hairspray-wielding, wannabe emo morons and amounts to nothing more than a third-rate Queen for emo kids and kindergartners. Oh boy, will we enjoy spewing some vitriol on one of the worst bands of the noughties. Join us next time as the Curmudgeon Rock Report brings you Why Chemical Romance Are Shit. And man, boy, does it get really bad here.
Yep.
Battleborn from 2012. And here's where the Killers descend into lightweight, middle-of-the-road pop rock fluff.
Yep.
As if they hadn't pointed that was the direction they were going in from the very beginning with their insipid, glam, new wave 1980s cheese take on Springsteen. Here, the formula, though, starts to get stale, as if it wasn't unlistenable in the first place. The first single, Runaways, is the clearest example of this, but songs like Miss Atomic Bomb and Here With Me are utter embarrassments of sentimental high school prom schlock rock. At this point, the Killers are starting to sound like a shitty band doing a shitty impersonation of the Killers, who were shitty to begin with. I think I'd rather listen to Night Ranger. Chris?
Yeah, well, hey, Night Ranger, at least, remember, they had a really great guitarist who was on that Ozzy record, Speak of the Devil, and basically played Tony Iommi in that. So I'll always admire Night Ranger just for that. Anyway, yeah, you got to remember, this was the album where the Killers sort of weren't a real band at this point.
Yeah.
That the other two guys, besides Brandon Flowers, one was recovering from an injury. I guess he had a pyro injury. I think it was around this time. And then, either burnout or injuries or personal stuff. And so they kind of were peeling off. And at this point, it's Brandon Flowers and a merry rotating cast of friends, session guys, and occasionally those two other guys, the actual real members of the band. And so that's where you kind of get why you start getting this, oh, hey, I'm free to discover my own influences, i.e., really bad remixes or takes on Born to Run. Here it's kind of like Born to Run ripoff part 1, Born to Run ripoff part 2, and so on. Runaways is hilarious because it actually has the lyric, "Let's take a chance, babe, we can't lose."
Good Lord.
Yeah, I know. And in a weird way, it might be the most sincere Flowers song of them all until their most recent record. We'll get to that later, obviously. So, yeah, you get that. And so the other strange thing about this record, though, is that apparently Flowers had earned enough respect, or at least had a big enough name, that he was able to recruit Steve Lillywhite.
Oh, God.
And Daniel Lanois to record some of the songs.
Let's recreate U2.
Yeah, or just at least get some of that Daniel Lanois atmospheric vibe, which they kind of do. And I'll admit, Daniel Lanois has a thing. When it's good bands, it really comes through, and Lanois invested. When it's bad bands, it's just like, I'm here to make my money and do my thing. So I think this is the latter Lanois. But here's a quote from Mr. Flowers, again from Uproxx. Quote, "And Daniel Lanois, I had also worked with Lanois on my solo record, and he can be intimidating. At the same time, he just raises the bar. Just by him being in the room, the bar is raised. If you think about his discography, it's like, quote, oh my gosh, I got to bring something." That's where a song like Be Still on that record came in. I wish it was called Be Quiet. But anyway, I'm trying to impress Lanois, and that's the song that holds up. That song and The Way It Was were both tied to basically us trying to impress Daniel Lanois, and those are probably the two best songs on the record. Oh, okay. I guess, Lanois a pro. And then finally, here's a line from a BBC review. And again, BBC is not known for their music reviews, but once in a while they come up with some good lines. And here's one. And I think this is meant to be just a straightforward, almost complimentary sentence, but it's hilarious when removed from the rest of it. Quote, big guitars riff over widescreen escapism until the synth-driven deadlines and commitments takes a break from the manly power chords, and then Miss Atomic Bomb sketches American 60s innocence watching nuclear testing mushroom clouds while picnicking. Yeah.
That sounds like a bot or an AI bot wrote the review. Speaking of bad writing,
Yeah. More bad writing. An album called Wonderful Wonderful, which
from 2017, not too long ago.
Yeah, which ought to be called Terrible Terrible.
Right. It's the only Killers album to hit #1 in the US.
Yep.
And it sees this truly horrible band finally change their sound up even just a little bit. But of course, this being the Killers, this change of sound means a dumbing down, glossed up, inferior version of whatever influenced it. Brandon Flowers is clearly going for lyrical sarcasm with The Man, the lead single, but sarcasm doesn't suit him since he still comes across like a primped up hipster douchebag, and the gay macho chic of the video doesn't help matters either. Musically, it is insipid dance. It's insipid dance rock. Sounds like the worst parody of a Mark Ronson production. Wait, there's more. You have Run for Cover, which aims for the sleek indie rock of the Strokes again, but injected with the cheesiest of synthesizer underpinnings and Flowers' typically ham-fisted vocals. It sounds like Loverboy updated for the 21st century. Truly awful. By the time you get to the surprise, surprise, glossy, synthesizer-ridden, stupid-ass ballad of Rut, you cannot escape the feeling that the Killers are one of the worst bands of the 21st century. They make the Foo Fighters look like Radiohead. Fuck this band. I'm getting sick of it already, Chris.
Yeah, I was going to say. And by the way, shame on you for evoking Loverboy in a negative manner. Loverboy was great. Come on, Turn Me Loose, Working for the Weekend. I mean, those are like all-time great singles. Anyway, The Man, I will confess to liking in a guilty pleasure sense. It's a fun song. It's got that wonderful, like, ridiculous lyric, but it's great. USDA certified lean. I'm the man.
Yeah.
So, like you said, kind of almost like he's trying to do like white Mormon village people there. So, from All Music, their review, and this goes, quote, the record charms because its ridiculousness is sincere and its sincerity is ridiculous. Two qualities that make Flowers and his art messy and quite genuine. Okay. To me, this album really plays like a bad impression of the war on drugs, which is funny because he went on to, it's either on this record or the next that Grandusio.
It's the next one.
Yeah, Adam Grandusio actually makes he actually comes in and plays on one of these songs. And then I didn't even write the name of the song down for this one. Yeah, it's called Have All the Songs Been Written? That's the name of it. Here's a Hall of Shame level terrible lyric for you. And I'll read this in a dramatic style that Mr. Flowers was going for. Have all the songs been written? Have all the truths been told? Has all the gas been siphoned? What? Do the planes still carry gold? And that's planes as in the fruited planes, not like, airplanes. Do the planes still carry gold? Has every ship gone sailing? Has every heart gone blue? Have all the songs been written? Oh, I just need one to get through to you. I just need one more. And hopefully this is the last one.
This sounds
So
like someone like wrote these lyrics while they were taking a shit.
yeah, pretty much, which actually Flowers admits to Uproxx. And so it shows that he's at least honest when he thinks he's off. And he says, quote, there are some great songs on Battleborn and Wonderful, Wonderful, but as a band and as a unit and as just a machine, we were not settled and we were not cohesive. Now, there's a little bit more of a North Star. He's talking about now, there's a little bit more of a North Star. It's hard because people do have a lot of strong feelings, our fans, about an album like Wonderful, Wonderful or Battleborn, but we were drifting a little bit. And again, this is sort of, they haven't been a real band for a while. It's been the Brandon Flowers project there. So there you go about this record. Yuck poo shit.
Next album, Imploding the Mirage from the COVID lockdown year of 2020. By this point, the Killers stopped having hits for over a decade, and it's easy to see why. Their sound is perennially stuck in what can be described as that naughties band, and only their diehard fans really care about them by now. Caution sounds like the war on drugs with an obnoxious singer and even more obnoxious chorus and stripped away of all the gauzy psychedelic guitar. Of course, it's the Killers. They make everything cheesy, but it isn't as cheesy as My Own Soul's Warning, which continues the band's latest obsession with taking the war on drugs sound and making it as testicle free and as soulless and as vapid as possible. Fire and Bone sees the Killers try on a funk outfit, but this being the Killers, it's funk injected with the tackiest and campiest of synthesizer arrangements, and of course, Brandon Flowers' tone deaf attempt at soul. Yeah, it's that freaking bad.
Yeah, I was gonna say, he does have soul. It's just, thinner than like construction paper. Yeah, so I will give him this. At least he got Lindsey Buckingham to do the solo on Caution, and and it's a good solo. I mean, Lindsey Buckingham, you put him on the most terrible song, and he'll still do a great solo. Why? Because he's Lindsey fucking Buckingham, and he's one of the more talented guys in the history of rock and roll. So hey, at least there's that. And you talk about phony war on drugs or bad war on drugs. Adam Granduciel does appear on the song Blowback. So otherwise, this album is actually a pretty proficient and pretty competent job of ripping off Born in the USA to the point where there's actually some Roy Bittan style keys in a few of the songs. It's like literally it's the Roy Bittan, kind of. He had that great ability to do those sticking six keyboard notes to really kind of back up the riff.
Right.
Yeah, there's actually some attempts at that, and so 2 points. I'm going to start with Mr. Flowers, and then we'll go into a review that I think is very telling, or a review excerpt. So Brandon says to Uproxx, quote, and this is pretty funny to me, quote, we were thinking, let's write Killers-esque songs. Oh, okay, Killers-esque. From the Killers guy, that kind of shows that derivativeness is in his DNA. So anyway, to continue, quote, we pushed it pretty hard, but we definitely had that stadium setting in mind. It sounds like, oh, you just wanted to make a stadium record. It's not that easy. It needs to be transcendent, and it needs to still be able to reach people. It's a big task, really. We naturally write bigger songs. It's a part of my voice, and it's a part of the way that Ronnie, the guitarist for this band, plays, and it's a part of where we're from. So we've never seen it as something to scoff at. Now, it's pretty ironic, or pretty, I guess unfortunate that it says that this still needs to be able to reach people, because it was released just as COVID was breaking out, and it was able to reach no one. And so which then informs the latest record, which we'll talk about shortly. And then let's talk about, I don't know when it happened. It was sometime in the mid 10s where we turned a corner where all of a sudden younger millennials and older Gen Z critics started getting published in the reputable, or at least formerly reputable publications. And this has happened everywhere. This is from New Musical Express, and This is definitely a young person writing this. It says, if Wonderful Wonderful was an arm around a trembling shoulder, Imploding the Mirage is a raised fist to the future. Accidentally, it's the sort of attitude that could help us all endure such trying times. Obviously, this is during COVID. And the Killer's sixth album sounds unbreakable too. They long ago reached their natural pumped up radio rock peak, yet here sound as though they've been hitting the sonic steroids. Okay, whatever
Yeah.
you say.
This is
And
clearly a person who's a fan, and there aren't that many casual fans left of the Killers anyways.
yeah, and maybe they're a fan, but it's also, like we like to bag on the new wave of bad reviews coming out of Britain. Maybe, and this is just indicative of that. On Metacritic, if you go on there, obviously, Hot Fuss is their quote unquote classic album. But if you look at the composite scores on Metacritic over the years, it goes from like the early, like the low 60s all the way up to now where it's almost reaching 80. And so I think that's indicative of it's not so much growth in the Killers so much as like, depletion of taste.
Depletion of taste among especially British music critics, for
Yeah,
sure.
but it's starting to stain America
Yeah,
too.
of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know, like last year's Rolling Stone top 10, where like their top 10, I think like at least 7 of the records are awful. So there
Yeah.
you go.
Anyway, the next album and the last album the Killers produced from 2021, just a year later, Pressure Machine. I have not listened to it. Yes, folks, leading up and
Yeah.
preparing for this episode, I went through all the Killers albums. I just couldn't anymore. I couldn't listen anymore. I'm done. I was done. I just couldn't. I couldn't listen to any more fucking Brandon Flowers music. It was just too much for me. I couldn't. I'm done. Checked out. Sorry, Chris. I'm
Yeah,
checked out.
I guess that's the best argument for the title of this here episode called "Why the Killers Are Shit." They're so shitty that like Arturo threw the white flag up on their catalog.
I'm done. I just can't
Yeah.
listen anymore.
Okay, so this to be fair, and folks, if I was to say, if you actually asked me for a recommendation on how to go through the Killers, I would say start here. It's their best record, as in it's probably 3-star, 3.5-star. And here's why. I think that what happened, and this happened to a lot of artists during COVID. I think most famously Taylor Swift, when you're stuck at home and all you have is your introspection and a few instruments, you want to get more personal or tone it down. And this is what Brandon Flowers is doing. He's originally from a small town in Utah called, I believe it's Nephi or Nephi, Utah. And I think it's in the northern part of Utah. It's the mountains, essentially. And it's small town America. And like most of small town America, it's had its struggles. And so he's trying to evoke and he's trying to pay tribute to this because he spent most of this time hunkered down up there. And so he does reflect that. The only issue with it is that we talked about the Springsteen reverence. He goes from being reverent of Born in the USA and Born to Run to being reverent of Nebraska and the river, which in a few spots actually does work on this album. But like, the song Quiet Town is a really, really good song. And that's in the good Springsteen tradition of these kind of quieter songs. And I'll give him credit. It's more honest. It's more open. He talks a little about like one or two songs, like his wife is a complex trauma survivor slash
Yeah.
sufferer, which I can dig because,
Yeah.
I'm a complex trauma guy too. We won't talk about that one too much, but at least I can kind of understand that one. But anyway, again, so this is the closest they've ever gotten to being really good. It's still not close enough. It still has its fair share of garbage on it. And he actually cops to aping Nebraska in a couple of cases. Here's a hint, folks. It ain't Nebraska. Uh, you know,
No shit.
probably the stupidest thing or the most obvious thing I've said here. So another Sputnik music excerpt to share with you, and it says, and this is a glowing review, but it's kind of funny. It says, "quote Get ready to toss all of your preconceived notions about the Killers out the window, though, because Pressure Machine captures the essence of an entire American subculture during one of the most tumultuous times in the nation's history. It's a rare album, their Nebraska even, and for once, such a lofty statement is anything but hyperbole." And I'm like, yeah, dude, that's hyperbole. Don't say it's not hyperbole. If you're going to
Yeah.
compare this album, if you're going to compare anything to Nebraska, it better be actually close to Nebraska. I mean, how many albums can you name that actually approach the originality and the power of Nebraska? Maybe
A
four.
couple, maybe there's one Daniel Johnston album I can think of, but aside from that,
Yeah, and then maybe there's some Wilco songs that might
sure.
approach it, especially in the earlier part of the catalog. If there's any song that I can think of off the top of my head, it would be maybe Wilco's "Ashes of American Flags,"
Yeah.
which is I guess it's a glossier take on the Nebraska thing, but it again, if you're talking about the wistfulness of a dying America, even if it was 20 years later, it's the same kind of thing. And so now we're going to have the most fun run through Brandon Flowers' quotes here. And I took this from a couple of sources. He also did an interview with the British site Line of Best Fit, which I guess does some pretty good profile work, but also does probably the single handedly worst reviews on the planet.
Mm.
So, anyway, so let's go through the Brandon Flowers thinking he's self aware, but sounding really ridiculous tour. Okay, so from Line of Best Fit, a couple of quotes. Quote, "When I realized I could write about things that were more personal to me or experiences I had observed, there is this whole other treasure trove to unlock and dive into. That's been really good to me over the last few years." Hey, treasure trove. One man's treasure is another man's vermin. Anyway, quote from later in the interview, quote, "At first, I was nervous about it being too much of an insider look at a place and if that was going to translate with Killers fans or anyone. Then I started to realize there was something about the authenticity and honesty that was coming out of me that was going to translate with you wherever you're at." Wow, authenticity and honesty. Okay. Hey, it only took you 16 years or 17 years to figure that one out. And then here's the most ridiculous quote, certainly by this guy, but maybe of all time. And it even doesn't even make any sense. This is back to the Uproxx interview. Quote, "I realized the other day when somebody told me this is album number 7. And this is when you too made Achtung Baby. This is kind of our Achtung Baby without copying that record." So, yeah, sort of saying that Achtung Baby is their 7th record. And so, hey, our 7th record, their 7th record.
So ours
Hey,
must be as good as Octung Baby.
yeah, or hey, but this is well, we didn't copy that record. Well, nobody's copied that record because it's one of the 10 best albums ever made. So that is the single most ridiculous quote that I am using here. Although this one comes close, and he's also talking about this record and about his supposed evolution. He says, quote, "I definitely credit something like Steinbeck's Pastures of Heaven, which has become, which has become one of
Hey,
my
he's reading now.
yeah, he's reading more and more, hooked on phonics. So, and then he says, okay, so let's start over. Let's go back. Quote, "I definitely credit something like Steinbeck's Pastures of Heaven, which has become one of my favorite books, where everything is set in the same valley." Whoa, dude. Anyway, it was like, can we do that with an album? Sure, like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people before you. But I digress. Let's get back to it. Quote, "As I get older, I do gravitate towards more music that my dad would have listened to, whether it's Johnny Cash or John Prine. I started to listen to that stuff around Sam's Town, just bits and pieces. Then, as time goes by, you discover more, and it's just like anything else. If you look at the opening line of Quiet Town, I never would have written what cargo was on the train without somebody like John Prine." Wow. So we needed John Prine to be able to put cargo on a train.
At least he's listening to John Prine.
Yeah, hey, at least, yeah, exactly. At least he's listening to John Prine. And so, yep, the evolution of Mr. Flowers from completely aping Duran Duran for really for really liking John Prine and describing Cargo. So, yeah, I had to cover that last record. I'm sorry, Arturo. Turns out I had more stamina than you did.
Yeah, it's just when it comes down to this band's music is truly awful. It's hollow, it's shallow, it's pompous, it's melodramatic in the worst way without the depth or the intelligence. It's just, ugh, God,
Now,
what a slog.
granted, yeah, there are 5 singles earlier in the catalog, and then also The Man. So you got about 5 songs where what you just described is not a bad thing, because it does lead to good radio candy. And, let's say, at least with The Man, it's fun and not too self-serious. But, after that, like you said, it just plummets, and it plummets, and it plummets. Hot Fuss is a really frustrating album. I guess the legacy of that record is 3 undying singles with a whole bunch of shit. Where Flowers likes to think he found himself as a songwriter. No, he found himself as a guy that was, you've heard me say it in the past, Arturo. I haven't said it too much on this podcast, but every band is capable of one great 3-minute pop song.
Oh, yeah.
At least one. I think every artist can catch lightning in a bottle, some more than others. I guess, all these things that I have done.
There's an old English saying I've heard. The sun shines on a dog's ass every now and then.
Oh yeah, or at least, hey, a clock stuck, a clock that doesn't work is at least right twice a day.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess you can kind of say that. So that's kind of the summary of a guy who was capable of writing great singles that mostly wrote self-absorbed. Basically, he was paying tribute to his heroes in a very milquetoast, boring, almost uninspired way, and in some ways so reverent it's laughable. As we said, by the end, he's actually rewriting Born to Run. I think I can do my own Born to Run, and I'm like, ish. So that is the sound effect for this episode. And with that, folks, thank you for joining us on what officially is episode 55. Wow. Man, we keep going. I mean, there's dozens and dozens of people that listen to our podcast, but man, we persist. It's a labor of love, and I'm telling you, we're like bedroom superstars. Chicka chicka wow. So with that, folks, as always, you can join our Facebook curmudgeonly community, as we call it. It's grown over the last month. So actually by 20%. So thank you folks for coming on board. And we've been posting a lot more on there. Arturo just put a review of Boy Genius on there, which we both agree that Lucy Dacus, as it turns out her name is pronounced, is a genius. The other 2 girls, not so much. So yes, join us there at facebook.com/groups/curmudgeonrock. We also always encourage folks to email us if you have thoughts and random musings, or if you do not think the Killers are shit and you want us to go F ourselves, reach us at curmudgeonrock@gmail.com. And then we are also out there on Twitter. Elon Musk has made it a weird place, but we're still there, and we follow folks like Jason Isbell and Steve Gorman and a few other artists that do have some wonderful feeds. I do have to give a shout out to one I have not mentioned before, D. Snyder. D. Snyder basically dedicates most of his feed to trashing the conservatives that want to steal We're Not Gonna Take It for their own fascist...
self-serving motherfucker.